Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Thanks for taking a moment to click the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon on the YouTube videos. Those all uh, help you stay connected to us and help us broaden our viewership. And we especially would appreciate if you haven't subscribed yet to do so, just because we are closing in on 100 subscribers. And it probably doesn't really mean anything, but it sounds like a nice number to us. So thanks for that.
So each week, if you're new to this channel and you're just tuning in, each week, Todd and I we'll be talking about the gospel lectionary reading for the upcoming weekend. Our goal is to talk about those lectionary readings from the gospels in the context of love and societal justice and inclusion. And our hope is that our conversation will be just, as in justice, therefore just talking, but that also something we might say during this brief time together might inspire you along with us to do more in our Jesus following than just talking. So, Todd, what passage are we looking at this week?
We are at John chapter 1, verses 6 through 8, and verses 19 through 28.
Yeah, so it's the Gospel of John's version of John the Baptist. And there's a lot here that is overlap with what we talked about last week. So if you haven't seen last week's show, I want to encourage you to go back and watch that. But the first thing that jumps out at me in the Gospel of John's version of John the Baptist, in the way that John the Baptist is characterized here, is this very odd kind of about face reversal where for the first time John distances himself, not just distances himself, but even rejects any association with himself and Elijah and the prophet, especially the Messiah. But I find that odd because in all of the other synoptic versions of the Jesus story that we have in our sacred canon and all the other gospels, Jesus and the disciples and others, they are constantly associating John with Elijah and the one who is to prepare the way and that prophet and the one who was to come. There's this tie in there where John is of the greatest of the prophets and
Mhm.
is John is very much so associated as being another kind of Elijah in his own day, the way that he's calling out to the powers and the stat critiquing the status quo. When we get to John, you find this. I mean, there's no baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist in the Gospel of John. There's this rejection by John the Baptist of any association with Elijah. And where in the other Gospels, Jesus starts out as a disciple of John's. And then when John is in prison, Jesus goes out on his own in his own ministry. Here, you don't get any of that. Jesus isn't even mentioned as having been baptized by
Mm.
John the Baptist. And so it makes me scratch my head and say, why the difference here? Why is this such a unique portrayal? Why is John being characterized this way? Historic Jesus scholars, they posit that maybe the Johannine community and the community of the disciples of John the Baptist, there was some competition or something going on at that time. There was a struggle going on where, Jesus had to be so lifted, above John
Mhm.
that John had to be completely subservient, where you could get the idea that Jesus started out underneath John, and then, took John's place or took on a
Right.
different movement. But in John, and those are in the synoptics. But when you get to the Gospel of John, I mean, John says, I'm not even worthy to stoop down and tie his sandals. There's
Mm.
this kind of back bending effort to
Mhm.
make sure we know that John the Baptist is less than Jesus.
Mhm.
And there's not even a hint that Jesus could have been even equal with, or, much less than
Mhm.
John the Baptist. And so there's just a stark contrast here. It makes me wonder what was going on. with
Yeah.
the community, the Johannine community who followed John, the disciple of Jesus. What were they in competition with John the
Right.
Baptist disciples community?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a question that doesn't seem to have a direct answer, but we know that from reading the Gospel of John in general, you've got Jesus elevated much higher
That's right.
supernaturally than in the synoptics, and so that's consistent. But at the same time, it is odd that they felt like they had to diminish John the Baptist. That somehow that
So
was going to take
much.
away from Jesus,
Right.
and it doesn't seem to do that in the synoptic gospels. It seems like Jesus honors John, and the gospel writers honor John and Jesus both as being in the trajectory of the Hebrew prophetic tradition, and Jesus may be the latest greatest, and John the Baptist the next to the greatest. According, Jesus says there's no other person born of women than John the
Right.
Baptist, and so
None
it
of
doesn't
those
seem to be
accolades belong to John the Baptist in the Gospel of John.
right, and so yeah, it's hard to know for sure, but we do know that John in general is on a quest for sure to really elevate Jesus' stature into the supernatural.
Yeah, I appreciate being reminded of that. John is high Christology. The divinity of Jesus is the claims for the divinity of Jesus are much stronger in the Gospel of John than in the Synoptics. Not that they're not there, they're just not at the same intensity. And yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I still have the question, but it makes sense
Right.
why Jesus has to be so high and John can't even be a competing character in the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one thing that I do appreciate about this week's version of the Jesus story, and especially their characterization of John the Baptist, is that although he rejects all those other associations, what he does reply with when they ask him who he is, what John does respond with is in perfect harmony with the other synoptic gospels. He says, "I am just the voice of one calling in the wilderness, make straight for the way of the Lord." And that wilderness is a really key narrative element in all of the versions of the Jesus story that we have in our sacred text. And we spent a long time last week again talking about that social location being on the margins and being on the edges of a society, and how change comes from the edges of a society always towards the center or from the grassroots up, not top down. And how John stood in contrast with the the priestly class, the elite, the property, the powerful, the privileged. We spent a long time talking about that last week. So again, I don't
Right.
think we need to rehash all that. If you haven't seen last week's, go back and watch that. But I do want to share this one thing. I got a message from a friend of mine this week, and they are they're a pastor out west, and this person, dear friend of mine, they identify as non-binary, and this is what they wrote to me. "I'm listening to you and Todd in preparation for my sermon tomorrow." They were listening to last week's video. "In preparation for my sermon tomorrow, and I just want to say again how much I love and appreciate you guys. I was just talking with a friend who is an LGBT community organizer for the ELCA on Wednesday about how we have to frame the conversation around inclusion for churches as a spiritual growth opportunity rather than a mission or social justice issue, because queer people don't need to be rescued. The church does. It's the
Mhm.
church that is in crisis,
Mhm.
not the queer community."
Yeah.
And again, that's that. Isn't that a beautiful statement?
Yep.
That's that idea that, again, that that God is at work on the margins. And those of us at our tables, maybe in more centralized or centered social locations, sometimes we can make the mistake of thinking we need to include others who are being marginalized at this table. That instead of invite, that's the table that actually needs flipped. You know what I'm saying? That's one of the
Yep.
money changers tables. God is
That's,
actually already at work on the edges and the margins. And we're with God when we're working in solidarity with where God already is. So it's not those on the margins that are in crisis. It's the centered, privileged church that's in crisis, and we're missing out. We're missing out on what God's doing there on the
yeah,
edges by not participating in that.
yeah. I I was in my cohort this week of chaplains that were journeying through this year together, and one of my colleagues gave the devotional thought for this week, and he quoted this author Ross Gay, um, who writes about uh, the the times of brokenness, the times of isolation, the times of outcastness that we all feel and experience over the course of our lives at times where we're the ones uh, uh, not fitting into the American dream or the success story that we have written for ourselves that we dream we're going to have, and he describes those moments of where we're broken as a wilderness, our wilderness journeys, and he says it is actually could we not in these as people who all have wilderness experiences could that not be where we find our connection to community and our connection to God
Mm,
is in those outskirt places of our lives that are the most vulnerable, the most wounded, and that it's actually at those places where we have been harmed by others, where the where the mainstream society has not uh, taken care of us or loved us. It's at those places where we actually connect in spiritual community with one another and with God.
mm,
Um, and I just really found that powerful.
absolutely.
That though that is actually that's actually where God is God is at work in uniting us together in in community. And I think and we see God doing that in the ministry of John the Baptist and the work he did. We see Jesus being one who is in the wilderness as well. We've seen the mystics throughout time as people who often it was their wilderness experiences that opened them up to the greatest awareness of what God was doing and how to serve God in the world
Mhm.
was out of those wilderness spaces.
I resonate with that. That is really encouraging, especially for those of us whose story doesn't always line up with the success model of our society. Um,
Mhm.
I'm thinking of ways in which I have been rejected or ostracized because of the justice stands that I've had to take, and where it has cost me on one side to lose a certain social location and to be pushed toward the margins myself. I still have a lot of privilege, and so I don't want to place myself in the same struggle as those who have less privilege in our society than me. I want to be very sensitive to that. But as I've been pushed toward the margins, it's not just a story of loss. It's not just a story of not being, as successful as maybe you could have been had you kept your mouth shut. I've also come in contact with some very beautiful human beings
Yes.
who have
Yes.
changed my life for the better. The people that I have found on the margins have been deeply life-changing for me.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and and though my life doesn't always look like the definition of success, and what a blessing it has been to have been pushed towards
Mhm.
those communities where God is already present in the
Mhm.
wilderness doing these special things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I love
Absolutely.
that, Todd. That resonates deeply with me this week.
Mm. Mm.
So I will say this. I know that we're in the Gospel of John this week, and the Gospel of John doesn't talk about Jesus's baptism by John, but the other three Gospels do. And one of the things that I appreciate about Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all three, is the language that they borrow from Isaiah when they describe Jesus's baptism. And I'm going to read Isaiah 42 verse 1. It says, "Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him." And this is where that language comes from. This is my son and whom I love and who I am well pleased. And we see the spirit, descending like a dove on the head of Jesus. But in Isaiah 42, it tells us what the purpose of all that chosenness and delight and approval and spirit anointing, what the purpose of all that is. And it says, so that he will bring justice to the nations. So
Mm.
it ties all of that back into the Hebrew prophets, into the call for God's just future, justice for the oppressed, justice for those on the undersides and edges of society. It's this emphasis on not religiosity, but establishing justice on the earth, bringing justice to the nations. And so then it makes me ask, well, even though the Gospel of John doesn't have that, we still have John the Baptist saying, "I'm the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, make straight the Lord's path, a path for the Lord, make straight." So who are our John the Baptist today that are doing the preparation work for justice to come to the nations, for
Mhm.
justice to be established on the earth in
Mm.
our context, in our time, in our era?
Yeah.
And I can
And
think of many movements, many justice movements.
yeah. Yeah. And across ideological, philosophical, religious
Yeah, they don't
backgrounds,
have to be
or
religious.
no religious,
Right.
there's folks that are doing that work who wouldn't believe in following Jesus, and yet they're doing exactly that type of work. And
They're doing Jesus like work.
right, and again, there's quotes from Jesus that suggest that it's more important what the person does than what they believe, and so those doing the work are the ones that should be celebrated and recognized for continuing the calling that was on John the Baptist and upon Jesus.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It doesn't matter whether they're religious or not, or if they are, what faith tradition. If you're preparing the way for justice to be established in the earth, you're doing
Mhm.
the same work John the Baptist was. You're
Yeah,
doing the same work.
yeah.
And Advent, this weekend, by the way, we last week we were struggling to remember. We got so lost in the text, we were struggling to remember what last weekend's Advent theme was, and it was peace. But this week's is joy. And I think about that preparation work in the wilderness. That's not always joyful. That's not always joyous. Sometimes it's just hard work, and sometimes it's a struggle, and sometimes you're just trying to feed your family, and you know what I mean. It's not always joyous. But I think the joy comes in when you remember and you imagine the kind of just, safe, compassionate world that you're actually doing the work of preparation for.
Mhm, mhm.
That's where the joy is
Yeah.
for Advent is we're waiting for the advent of God's just future.
Mhm, mhm.
But we're at this moment preparing for. We're doing the preparation work like John the Baptist, and there's joy not always in the work, but there's joy in the world that we're working for, that we're
Mhm.
working to prepare the way for.
There's something about this time too. This is the third of 4 weeks of Advent, where the third at this point, there starts to be in the story of Jesus coming that there's signs, there's little things that are showing up that's suggesting that God's reign is on the way, that things are little snippets here and there that are showing the way. And I think it is important to stop and recognize, especially for those who are involved in justice work, it's very easy to get discouraged at the slowness of the work. And so
Mm.
to pause and to recognize where there are actually signs in the work you did or the work and the lives of those you worked with, that there are little signs of justice taking place, that you can celebrate that and let that tell you that uh, you are part of and you're seeing a little bending of the moral arc of the universe towards justice.
Yeah, I was thinking about what you're saying as you're saying it, Todd. And over the last decade, there have been some significant strides made by
Mhm,
certain communities that are working for a more just world in
mhm,
whatever area of justice they're working for. Now we've lost some ground too. There have been
mhm.
some negative, some backwards motion there
Right,
for sure. I'm thinking of women's rights specifically, but in
right.
matters of race and matters of LGBT justice, the last decade we've made some progress down that
Mhm,
road. And so yeah, it's never as fast as the communities who need that need it to be.
mhm.
Um, but it's not all just hard work. There are some snippets, there's some hints, there's some tinklings
Yeah,
that you know justice is on the horizon.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So you got anything else this week, Todd?
Um, really don't. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like it's in some ways a rehash of last week, and so not a lot of new information here. Um, it just uh, it just reminds me why you and I just love the Gospel of John. Love it, love it. It's whenever
More questions than answers.
those of you who have watched us for a while know how much Herb and I love
You
the
know that's
Gospel
not
of John.
true. You know
Uh,
that those of you who are
it's
watching this regularly know
fan.
that's not true. And this week is
So
another example. Why do you have to drag John the Baptist through the mud?
So
Uh,
no, we're that's just if you want to see the weeks that Herb and I are going to struggle, just look ahead in the lectionary to whenever there's a Gospel of John reading, and you'll
and
and
in the new year, we have one John coming up soon, but then we have a long run of Mark. And man,
oh,
I'm looking forward
Mark's
to that.
Mark's good.
Mark is excellent. One of the most profoundly life-changing books I've ever read is this book here, Binding the Strong Man, a political reading of Mark's story of Jesus by Ched Myers. If you haven't read it, pick it up. Man, it's such a good book. And we're about to dive into the Gospel of Mark next week or next year. So I'm excited.
Yeah, actually, if you could mention how our schedule over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, for those of you who watch us regularly, and you're wanting to plan the rest of your year, so we're going to meet next week. Next week, we're just going to do another conversation like this. We're going to be talking about a little bit of Mary's story, but then between Christmas and New Year's, Todd and I are going to take a week off. We're not going to do a video that week. We're kind of going to disappear off the radar, do some stuff with our families and for the holidays and that kind of stuff. But we'll be back then the very first week of the new year, the first week of January, and that weekend has the gospel text of Epiphany and Jesus's baptism both. And so we'll do a little bit of conversation on both of those themes. So it's a twofer. So since we're skipping a week, we'll get a 2-for-1 on that first week back. But yeah, so if you're planning the rest of your year, we'll be back next week. Then we'll be gone the second week, and then we'll return the third week, which is the first week of the new year.
Yeah. So all right, well that'll be good. Um, and let's see. Let's talk about end of year opportunities for giving.
Yeah. So if you appreciate this video and the show and these videos, and or you listen to Renewed Heart Ministries podcast, the Jesus for Everyone podcast, or you follow the blog, or you should appreciate our work, and you'd like to support Renewed Heart Ministries, you can do so by going to renewedheartministries.com. Right now, at the end of the year, what Todd's talking about is that all donations to Renewed Heart Ministries here at the close are being matched dollar for dollar. So that enables your donations to go to your support to go twice as far as it normally would the rest of the year. Also, we have some special thank you gifts going on as well. If you make a one-time donation, we're going to send you a free book on LGBT justice in the Bible. And then if you choose to become one of our monthly ongoing monthly supporters who sustain Renewed Heart Ministries work, we have a special thank you. We want to send you for that as well, and you can find out all of this stuff at renewedheartministries.com right now. And for those of you who already are supporting Renewed Heart Ministries, I just want to say thank you so. And you get to choose which voices you hear and support, and which voices you want to hear in your faith communities. And I just want to thank you for your support of our voice and our work, and you keeping us going. And again, if you would like to join them in supporting Renewed Heart Ministries work, you can just go to renewedheartministries.com and click donate and find out everything you need there.
So,
Anything else this
and
week, Todd?
nope, just remind everybody that anything else they want to go in deeper on in the reading of the blog, or pulling up a podcast, renewedheartministries.com is where you want to go. And
And you'll be able to find Todd's stuff there soon. I'm going to keep plugging away till it happens.
just I might just post some holiday pictures or something there. You can that's maybe as far as I get. We'll see.
Here's Todd and his Christmas tree.
My family and I, and all in our Christmas pajamas. Anyway,
You can find it all at renewedheartministries.com.
that just people just got excited hearing that.
Our viewership just went up. I see
Yeah,
clicks happening on the website.
right. No, we appreciate y'all. Thanks for sometimes don't know why, but we're glad that you find value in this and that you spend time with us. We really appreciate that. And as we mentioned earlier with the comment that Herb got this week, we love when we hear from you guys about how our journeys intersect and what you're doing in your ministry. We love that and always are grateful to hear from you. So I wish you all the best as we continue to journey through Advent and head towards Christmas. God bless you all, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks for watching, everyone.